Hi, everyone. So glad you're here. Welcome. We are going to be talking about what it takes to build a career pathway system that connects young people to real opportunities, from middle school all the way through apprenticeships and beyond. If you're here for that, you're in the right place. Today, you'll hear directly from the leaders doing this work in Delaware, what's working, what they've learned, what advice they have for others looking to create change in their communities. I'm John Garcia, Executive Director of the Pathways Impact Fund, an initiative catalyzed by Strive Together to support organizations advancing career pathways work across the country. Today's conversation is a chance to spotlight one of our grantees and the incredible impact they're driving on the ground. We're here with Rodel, a nonprofit that partners with policymakers, the private sector, philanthropy, and practitioners to make systemic changes that improve students' lives. As a founding partner of Delaware Pathways, Rodel has helped grow a statewide career pathway system from 27 students in 2014 to more than 30,000 today, building the kind of coordinated, data-driven infrastructure that connects young people to employment and economic opportunity. Today's conversation is about their work, their strategies, partnerships, systems they have built to drive results in career pathways development and youth employment across Delaware. We're joined by an incredible group of leaders. Luke Rhine, Vice President at Rodel, Kim Lopez, Program Director at Rodel, Rick Konysz, Associate Secretary for Workforce Support at the Delaware Department of Education. And then throughout the live stream, we'll invite you to drop your questions in the chat. We'll be monitoring them and answering as many as we can in real time. But to get us started, I'd love to turn it over to Luke to share a bit about Rodel, Delaware Pathways, and the vision driving this work before we dive into the discussion. Turn it over to you, Luke.
Absolutely. And before I jump in, just John, appreciate your leadership of the Pathways Impact Fund and just very gracious of the opportunity to partner with Strive Together. So just thank you. Rodel is an interesting organization. It's a little bit of a hodgepodge. So 25 years ago, Rodel got its start as a family foundation. So really at the intersection of early learning and K-12 education, focusing on educational improvement and opportunities for young people. 10 years ago, the organization evolved to be kind of an education and workforce intermediary in addition to a family foundation. So some direct grant making alongside some co-developed resources across our state agency partners, both at the Department of Education and the Department of Labor, as well as with local education agencies, institutions of higher education, and our State Workforce Development Board. Today, Rodel does both a family foundation and acts as an education and workforce intermediary, and we've launched some work through consultancy. There's a couple national projects that we lead a dual enrollment research fund. We lead a couple other things from policy to practice, kind of thinking about how we can replicate work both in our state and nationally. So that is a nutshell of Rodel. Our work around career pathways really stems from a vision that was established by Governor Markell more than 12 years ago, which is essentially we want to be the best in the country, in the world, at helping young people find their purpose, find their passion, and find success in life. And really over the last 12 plus years and through 3 different gubernatorial administrations, each of whom have kind of shaped this work over their tenures, the state has really evolved its education and workforce system to put students at the center and to make sure that we're equipping young people with the opportunity that they deserve and the paths forward in their lives to find success.
Thank you. Thank you. So, I mean, as you can see, we're super excited to have Rodel and the folks from Delaware here. Long kind of standing vision for this work, but we're going to get a chance to hear directly from the leaders who have been spearheading these efforts over time, hear from the experts here, and then make sure that folks are in the chat asking any questions that you might have about the work as well along the way. So, Kim, I'm going to start with you. Before we kind of really kind of dive into the technical components, I want to start with a student. If you could walk us through what a young person in Delaware actually experiences in Pathways, what does it look like for them, and what do you hope is true for them at the end of the high school experience?
Thanks, John. Really great question. I think it's really important to start off with some context just around Delaware and what students overall are experiencing. And so it is true that in Delaware, our districts are autonomous. They can kind of create the system for their particular students that they want. And so that means that no student is going to have the exact same experience as another. And that's what we want, right? We want them to have their own individual paths. And so with that in mind, the districts do an intentional job of having early exposure as much as possible for students as early as K, right? They could be in kindergarten learning things like my little guy is actively learning about careers right now. And then it kind of amps up in middle grades where we're making sure that it's a little bit more intentional, kind of really helping the student get to know who they are, what their interests are, so that they can kind of explore in a way that makes the most sense for them. And then in Delaware, in 8th grade, students get to choose. They have the opportunity to choice into a high school. So they could go to their feeder pattern school, or they could elect a different high school that they'd like, that might have a particular focus that they're interested in. Once they're in high school, most of our students are getting the opportunity to enroll in a program of study or a pathway, and they are taking 3 to 4 course sequences that get deeper and deeper as they go, allowing them to really immerse themselves in the different areas that they have chosen. And that might include work-based learning. Many of our students have the opportunity to do that. They also are earning college credits, whether that's through articulated credit or dual enrollment. And then by their senior year, we have something called Launch Month, where students are working with counselors and building administrators to finalize applications, whether that's for college, thinking about trade school, thinking about workforce, and just really having that assistance. And they can also at that time become more familiar with some of our state promise programs that would make college very accessible if that's where they choose to go. So at the end of the day, what we really want for all of our students is that they have a clear, supported runway to adulthood. They don't have to have it figured out, but they have to know that there are people along the way that will help them, and that there are resources and supports built in to help them get there. And so what that looks like for a particular student, I want to talk to you all about a student that I had the pleasure of working with this year, one of our leadership teams. She was a student in our healthcare pathway in one of our districts. Her father's a doctor. So she was like, I want to be a doctor. This is going to be great. It's going to be awesome. She actually even choiced into her school specifically for this because it was really known to be great for healthcare. She was really excited. She completed the whole sequence. She took many dual enrollment courses. She had an immersive work-based learning experience. And then the beautiful part of the system is she decided she didn't want to be a doctor. She actually wanted to be a lawyer. So she's a senior. She realizes, I want to become a lawyer in the future. And in our old model, she might have felt like, oh man, I made the wrong choice. But because of the way our systems are set up, she was able to really think about this as a strategic pivot rather than feeling like she made a mistake or something like that. So she was actually able to really think about using her experiences to test drive what she was thinking she wanted to do, and then ultimately find something a little bit, maybe a lot different, which really helped her along the way as she was already building her confidence academically. She was testing her boundaries in her work experience. She was getting those durable skills that we talk about so much. And so now she plans to combine her interests and really think about health-related law, which is a beautiful combination and something that we obviously want to see our students able to make those connections and feel like they can pivot without feeling like they failed. And so this is really what we hope for all of our students. We want them to be able to say, okay, I don't have 40 years mapped out, but I can leave high school with a clear sense of direction. I know how to leverage the skills that I have confidence in my future, and I can kind of, use the resources at my fingertips to make those things happen. So I think that's one great example of the way that our systems are working for our students.
Yeah, so not a design flaw, but like an intentional design choice, right? Where we're giving students a flexibility, be able to find meaning and purpose along with the things that they value, like earnings and good job prospects along the way. That's a great example. Thank you so much for that, Kim. So Rick, I'm going to turn to you. For people who are new to Delaware Pathways, can you give us a sense of the scope and scale of what's been built here and how a small state became a national model for this work?
Thanks, John. And I appreciate the platform through Pathways Impact Fund and Strive Together. And of course, appreciate our great colleagues, our great partners with Rodel as they've helped step by step, hand by hand as we've went through this particular area. So I work for the SEA, so the Department of Education at the state, who gets the opportunity to work in link together the LEAs throughout the state, the higher education institutions, as well as our workforce development. So that's the viewpoint I'm representing from this particular partnership and collaboration. And I'm just one person who's standing in this long line of folks who are all working on it. And that's one of the hallmarks of the Delaware Pathways experience. I've been in the state working on this for 3 to 4 years now, and that's one thing I take away is that the strong investments from partnerships. Luke mentioned the gubernatorial support we've had through 3 administrations, the support from the Department of Labor, the Delaware Workforce Development Board, our advocacy groups like Rodel, as well as our other state agencies that work through this. And I think the first governor, Governor Markell, who was mentioned 12 years ago, kicked this off, was in response to an economic pressure for using labor market information to meet the workforce needs of Delawareans. As a small state who's dependent on several large corporations, how is it that we work and shape a statewide model of career preparation that includes college experiences, so career and college preparation, that's targeted to the specific economic needs of Delawareans? And that's what's happened over this time. Our current governor, Governor Meyer's administration, has continued to be a champion of this area. One of his first executive orders we were proud to work on was on youth apprenticeships and earn as you learn programs that directly involve our youth learners for that particular aspect. And so we are happy as the SEA, as the Department of Education, to keep providing from that. It was mentioned earlier briefly, either by you or Luke, that a massive growth in this project. And Kim talked exactly what it's like for a sample student to go through it. And it's so nice to hear those examples, because we have so many of them, and they vary by pathway, by experience, by all kinds of other conditions that a student is entering in with. But moving into this model where Delaware Pathways reaches every district, every high school in the state, middle schools are included, our adult education students are included in our post-secondary options, and this comprehensive model that works towards matching the programs of study that students are engaged in to what the Department of Labor, the Delaware Department of Labor, says is our emerging and high interest career fields on a rotating basis, so that we're always shaping policy, shaping curriculum, shaping directions to meet that particular need. And just a few outcome measures before I move on from that is that we've grown all this time, but we're having success while doing it. Currently, about 75% of our high school students, so not including the middle school students or the post-secondary ed students and adult learning programs, took a Pathways course in our last academic year. So we are, that presence, that culture, that emphasis is widespread throughout the system. And it is something that we have many success stories like Kim just highlighted, but it also just is the underlying basis for many of the conversations that we're having about statewide policy when it comes to crucial investments into our education, our public education system. Of those students who become what we call a concentrator or a completer, so that's maybe they've taken a few additional courses or they're further along on their Pathways course, we see great success with 98% of them graduating high school in an expected time frame. This is well above our state average of 89%. And so it means that perhaps we're building in some sense of belonging, we're building in some efficacy, we're building in some career or college preparation skills that mean that they're working towards what they want to do, or gaining those skills, as Kim just alluded to, that will transfer into other things that will serve them well for a meaningful and successful employment in life. Of those graduates, half earn post-secondary education credits, and so we often come back to that statistic and talking about that jumpstart into post-secondary education, which we know is so critical for the medium and high wage and medium and high skilled jobs that are available in Delaware to keep them as Delawareans. Getting a jumpstart on those post-secondary or early post-secondary credits is important. 20% of our graduates have earned an industry recognized credential. And of course, we always encourage them to participate in our student organizations just to round out that social academic piece as they're developing leadership skills and connecting their career and college interests in different ways with peers around those lively, engaging student organizations. If you've ever been to an FFA or a DECA organization, it's a fun time. It's a fun conference. But that's a little bit about Pathways. What I try to explain to folks as they think about Delaware's model and its kind of omnipresent infiltration into multiple areas of both state agencies, but also the educational journey of students in the state.
Yeah, no, thanks for that, Rick. I think, although Delaware is a small state, there are like really great examples and ideas around how to bring partners to the table to kind of accomplish like, a big vision set of goals for work. So just kind of building on that, maybe you can talk a little bit about what it's taken to kind of get these folks kind of at the table as partners. You mentioned Department of Education, Labor, Delaware Tech, nonprofits, employers who are all participating in this. And from your seat of the agency, what made that coordination work? What's the state had to do to kind of keep investing in and to sustain that collective partnership and coordination?
Yeah, it comes from the top down and also comes from the bottom up. So from the top down, strong support from the governor's office. As I mentioned, Governor Meyer has been a strong supporter of connecting youth to both youth apprenticeship positions, but also earn as you learn programs, work-based learning, feeding into the economy in very real ways. Labor short, it's not every employer in the state has some kind of need for a pipeline into their industry. And so making very real connections from the top down about the importance of this policy and implementation plan, but also from the bottom up. We hear from parents and caregivers and teachers and students about the importance of linking maybe an abstract curriculum to a very hands-on practical way. So all that to say there's a lot of incentives, a lot of emphasis on getting those folks to the table. Very small, but very important is just dedicating time to having these missions, so these meetings. And so because this is not a one agency led initiative, it's a code shared coalition. It gives some shared ownership for partners to come together. They know when they make a decision that impacts the world in which they operate from, it likely affects how we've structured something through the Pathways program. That might affect the way in which they seek internships. It may affect the way in which that articulation credit comes across for universities. It may affect the way employers are engaged in other areas of it. So when everyone comes together, they can see their own ownership of the system, but also their ability to influence it, and more importantly, the results of it. So as we get into year 12 and beyond, we have more and more success stories and examples from folks who have students who have went through the system, completed that system, engaged in meaningful career pathways, become citizens, employees of Delaware, and through that aspect. So it's a system that feeds itself.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, what I heard there was, incentives are helpful, but kind of making space for the kind of coordination, putting the tables together, organizing that work, and then also, the self-reinforcing set of outcomes and success that keeps perpetuating the work, which is great. So, speaking of the kind of coordination work that we talked about, Luke, you sit at this table, but in a different role than a state agency. So, as an intermediary, in a system like this, what do you actually do kind of as an intermediary? If you can help us kind of get a sense of that work. And then as you've been such steady partners in this work, what does it consistently take to add value as an intermediary in this partnership?
Yeah, absolutely. So what I would I guess, to start with is, Rodel is one of many partners at the table. So as Rick mentioned, the Department of Education, which is our state education agency, it spans essentially pre-K through post-secondary education, all under the umbrella of the SEA. Another partner is our Department of Labor. Specifically, their coordination is through the Registered Apprenticeship System, the Employment and Training Division, as well as labor market information and kind of data analytics, as well as like coordination of data, the state's longitudinal data system. Our State Workforce Development Board, which is a majority employer board, is primarily responsible for employer engagement. Our Community and Technical College was really tasked with three things, which is really the alignment between K-12 and higher ed, the expansion of dual enrollment, and then they established some supports broadly across the state to expand work-based learning. And then you have two organizations, the United Way of Delaware, which provides some support and CBO coordination across the state to align in-school and out-of-school programming. And then you have Rodel. And when Rodel sat at the table, 12 years ago, when the state was creating its first strategic plan under Governor Markell, the initial task was around financial coordination. So helping the state essentially bring together federal, state, and philanthropic resources so that there was a collective effort across both the public and private sectors, like equally investing in the expansion and development of the state's career pathway system. And we were wildly successful at that. The state was able to braid together about $20 million a year across federal and state funding to essentially think differently about how resources were brought together to bear around young people. That included a bunch of state programs as well as some federal programs like Perkins, the Perkin Reserve, WIOA programming for youth, both in school and out of school youth programming. It also included state investments in the state's career and technical education system and some weighted funding and some incentive funding and those types of things. And then Rodel essentially worked with both philanthropic and private sector partners to raise additional private and philanthropic capital to couple and support the state's federal and state investments in this space. So over the last 12 years, we've raised a little over $35 million to support the state in its endeavors and to make sure that we are essentially connecting policy and practice and that we have resources to invest in innovation as well as other efforts that are strategic to both the state's kind of goals as well as the narrative that we're able to tell on how we support young people. So that's where the work began, John. It was essentially through like financial coordination, some very careful like financial modeling and mapping, as well as like making sure that the state was equipped to support and braid resources federally and through the state, but also that we were able to develop resources privately and philanthropically that helped accelerate growth and helped ensure that we had resources and the type of implementation support that we needed to be effective in the work. After that, Rodel kind of moved into providing a bit more programmatic support. So there's right now through the Pathways Impact Fund, this is a perfect example. The Pathways Impact Fund was an application that Rodel developed, but essentially we did it in partnership with Rick and the SEA. And we essentially sat down and said, all right, these are the goals of the Pathways Impact Fund. They exactly match what we are hoping to do in our next iteration and phase of work. We want to make sure that we're working in lockstep with the SEA and its work with LEAs, and that we have kind of duality and purpose, meaning we're able to work across both the public and private sector, or the public and the community space, but we're able to actually put resources alongside the department to help LEAs, to help locals, to help high schools, to help educators really think about and do this work with efficacy and with the implementation support that they need so that the state can grow quickly, the practice grows even faster, and that our policy environment learns from actual implementation. And so that there's a much tighter loop between implementation and practice and policy, and then ways in which we seek to then establish scale through things like additional funding structures or additional incentives or additional accountability models or things that help to create the environment that's conducive for growth and, growth with alongside some model of fidelity. So that's kind of where Rodel has evolved. The general premise of an intermediary is pretty simple. It's essentially many hands make light work. And having a sense of what the SEA is able to do, what LEAs are able to do, what organizations like Rodel that can live in the middle are able to do, it creates kind of a complementary structure. And what that means for Rodel is, we kind of have to be a little bit nimble. So in some cases, it's financial development. In some cases, it's strategy. In some cases, it's advocacy. In some cases, it's programmatic implementation. In some cases, it's working with the state to think about policy. But in all of those things, certain things are true. The first is like our shared value around young people and respecting young people's inclusion in our work and ownership of our work, which is a really fun thing that we work with the SEA to implement, really positioning young people to essentially articulate their visions and make sure that the state is responsive to that. But also like our roots as a nonprofit organization, we are deeply embedded in the community. So it's a neat way in which to bring folks around a table, and it's a neat way to create kind of a complementary structure. But in general, that is kind of the work that we do, some fiscal, some policy, some programmatic, and along that continuum of partners so that we're all able to carry, a complementary workload, and all of our work essentially fits within a pretty strict delivery chain.
Yeah. I love that. I mean, just adding value across the board, working with partners to kind of find, the right ways to do that in partnership with others. And the kind of history of how you guys evolved over time is really important too. I mean, even with the other intermediaries that, we partner with and support across the nation, different evolutions, different areas of strength, but all adding value with their partners across the board as well too. So great to hear that, Luke. So yeah, I'm just going to jump into our next question here. It's really focused a little bit more on this recent RTI study. In April, RTI International released an outcome study tracking more than 6,000 Delaware Pathways graduates. One of the first studies of its kind at scale. So I want to dig a little bit deeper into what those findings raised. So Luke, can you share a little bit more about that study and then why you were motivated to even conduct it in the first place?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're really excited about this study. So as John mentioned, we followed about 6,000 students for 18 months post high school across 3 graduating cohorts. More than half of Delaware's local education agencies across urban, suburban, and rural communities participated in this follow-up. What we essentially found is that, high quality career pathways do help young people transition into both post-secondary education and the workforce. I mean, that is the headline. The numbers, I think, are pretty remarkable. It is 74% of students were immediately enrolled in post-secondary education. So for us, that means 2-year, 4-year apprenticeship. It is 45% of those students were essentially pursued aligned majors. So that means if you were studying a healthcare program, as Kim mentioned, in high school, you essentially enrolled in a related major in post-secondary education. Which we're really excited about. It starts to give us a firsthand look at how the programming, college and career programming that exists in high school equips people, young people particularly, to make decisions about their futures and whether or not they are or are not pursuing aligned majors. It is 55% of Delaware Pathway graduates were employed within 6 months. Within 18 months, that number actually grew to 69%, which helps to tell, a thing that we all kind of know is true, but we rarely kind of acknowledge. Essentially, most young people are pursuing post-secondary education and work concurrently. And that is the reality for most young people as they navigate higher ed. They are also navigating some form of employment. So this duality in interaction with our post-secondary and labor market systems is real for the vast majority of young people. And then one of my favorite statistics is we essentially looked at the percentage of young people that within 6 months who were neither enrolled in higher ed nor employed. And that number was essentially 6%. So 6% of pathway graduates were neither employed nor enrolled in higher ed. And by 18 months, that number actually dropped to 2%. So it suggests a couple different things for me. So the first is that, career pathways are, particularly when they're intended to connect to higher ed, 2-year, 4-year systems, and as Rick described, the labor market, these programs and these opportunities for young people really can serve as a bridge into both post-secondary education and the workforce. And I think there's lots of policy that's wrapped around this, like Kim mentioned, Delaware State Promise programs, which almost universally make college affordable for students, right? In addition to how high schools are structured, so that they're structured as an acceleratory model, significant dual enrollment, significant work-based learning experiences. As Rick mentioned, right, these experiences coupled together are really the fuel that help young people to transition right across the graduation stage and beyond it. But what I really appreciate about the study is we actually started to look at aligned placement. So we looked a little bit more discreetly at students in healthcare, students in education, and students in the skilled trades. And there are a couple really neat highlights here. So first, for students who are enrolled in healthcare pathways, 81% of students in healthcare pathways enrolled in higher education immediately after high school. That is a ridiculous statistic. It's 4 out of every 5 kids in the program. And that's above, the pathway placement of 74%. And the national average of direct post-secondary matriculation is like 62, 63%, right? So we're talking 20% above a national average. So there's something about healthcare that creates a post-secondary identity for young people. And we also found that students who studied healthcare in high school, 60% aligned placement. So meaning 60% of the students in a healthcare program pursued an aligned major in college. which is pretty remarkable. The statistic in education was about 50%, and the statistic in skilled trades was about 50%, which is a neat, it's a neat juxtaposition. What it also helps us do, and there's a neat piece we put into the Hechinger report that kind of gets into some of this, is it helps us to look where there are other barriers to students matriculating into aligned majors. So one of the examples that I'll use is the state. Today is our last day of the legislative session, which kudos, Rick. Good job. You got through it. Yeah, it's quite a journey every year. But one of the things the state invested in this year was additional resources in our registered apprenticeship system. There is essentially a wait list, right? Thousands of people long for students to enroll in basically skilled trades programs at the post-secondary level. So this idea of helping shape aligned placement also helps us to expose where there are missed opportunities. The state just committed millions of dollars in resources to expand apprenticeship because we knew students are interested, but perhaps didn't have the opportunity on the post-secondary side. And again, those things don't impact every student, but they certainly impact some. And it helps us to really think through the continuum of education and workforce alignment, using students as kind of their experience to guide our work programmatically and from a policy perspective. And that's what we want. We want systems that are responsive to young people. We want feedback loops and data systems that help us make better decisions and help us prioritize investments that clear the path. And I think this is the type of analysis that helps us be a much more nimble in terms of actually how we connect K-12, higher ed, and workforce systems and policy across those spaces. So that, again, the options that young people have, how they experience and interact with these things, there should be no such thing as a wait list, right? There should be no such thing as, a partner who's not willing to receive and is ready to receive a young person after they walk across the graduation stage. Right? It helps us to essentially address what we know to be other perception or real barriers in terms of how young people navigate their futures and transition into things that they are passionate about.
Yeah, no, that's great. I mean, so many pieces here to pick up on. The alignment pieces, especially for valuable pathways, right? Making sure that the kind of supply meets the demand there, especially if there's just young people that we know could really benefit from that. The set of experiences that build momentum, help propel student success, right? But you also mentioned healthcare, for example, as a place where there's maybe a sense of meaning, belonging being built in, and that is a core component of some of the work we're supporting in Pathways too, which is an interesting thing to explore, right? Is an identity being formed here, and then are there ways that we can think about the student experience in the Pathways to kind of enhance that and really amplify that, because that is an important thing, right? As people are making choices based on meaning and identity and agency, right? So that's really important findings here. I think that a lot to draw from. So speaking of that, let's kind of dig a little bit deeper into something you also mentioned, which was 3/4 of Pathway graduates enrolled in post-secondary education after graduation. That is above the national average, but fewer than half in the field that they chose in high school. So what do you make of that mismatch? We talked a little bit about this before in another question, but is it a problem, or is it actually the point of Pathways? Maybe you can articulate a little bit there.
Yeah, I think Kim's example earlier is a really good articulation of what we hope. We essentially want young people, as they go through middle school and high school, to both shape their identity and their future education and career goals. So we want their kind of passion, their inspiration, who they are, to drive who they become. And I think we also want informed choice. We want young people to have a strong sense of who they are and the career that they want to enter as they exit high school, so that they're able to make an informed choice about post-secondary education, where they continue to pursue education, whether they choose to enter the labor market. And in reality, most kids are going to do both of those things. So I think that's what we want. We want really an informed choice. And I know, Kim, you have a bunch to add here, so I'm going to turn it over to you.
Yeah, I just wanted to add quickly, I think that the other piece of this to remember is that we're actively working with students, and while we know in middle grades they're getting exposed, they're learning more things, but we still know that they're still young. They're still young people. They're still trying to figure it out. So it's totally okay for them to say at the end, if they don't if their post-secondary plans don't match the pathway that they chose in high school, that's totally okay. And I think we should embrace that and almost push them to question, like, is this still what you want? Because I think one of the things that I'm excited to study with the Pathways Impact Fund over the next couple of years is just how confident are they feeling? Whether they are going into something totally unrelated or not, as long as they're confident in their next steps, I'm okay with that. It's totally fine with me if you studied healthcare and then decide to pick up a trade instead. That's totally fine, as long as you're like, okay, I tried this out. It wasn't for me, but I learned this, this, and this about myself. And so the Pathways Impact Fund opportunity is really allowing us to think about, how do we assess how confident folks are feeling? And if they aren't feeling confident, what else can we add to them, so that add to their experience, so that they can leave high school feeling like they made a good choice, whether they went into that pathway beyond high school or not. And I think the other piece that I think is important for us to think about as well is, jobs are changing so rapidly. We all know this, right? The jobs that exist today may not exist tomorrow. And so I think that's the other piece that I really want our students to leave with, this ability to be nimble, to pivot, to feel confident that they have the skills they need to be successful, no matter how the world shifts, as we know it's doing so. So I think that those are just some of the pieces that I would add. I think that it's important for us to not lose sight of the person that they are, and wanting them to leave high school really feeling, as confident as an 18-year-old can feel at the start of, all the tough choices that they'll have to make, but at least feeling confident in their own abilities and the networks that they've created. So I think some of the purpose belonging research that we're going to be doing is really exciting, and makes me feel even better about some of the stuff that we've already been doing, and being able to assess further. So I think it's helpful to know how many students actually continue that path, move their path, but I want to go one step deeper and understand the confidence behind those decisions.
Yeah. Yeah. So if that, decision is intentional, it's kind of, met with their own identity and their self of what they want, right? They understand what it takes to be successful in that pivot. They understand what kind of supports are out there to help them be successful along the way. We kind of have this mantra: I know who I am, I know where I'm going, I know what it takes to get there and who can help me get there. And so all those components, I think, within a more flexible way we think about pathways nowadays, are really important aspects that you both highlighted. So thanks for that. So Rick, I want to turn to you. The study also found that, one student, start a pathway, changing direction can be logistically hard. So what does the state think about, building in flexibility without undermining the structure that makes pathways valuable and coherent?
Yeah, I think both strategic accountability plan wise, but also programmatic wise, we know we have this problem. We know if you decide to make changes earlier in your middle or high school career, it's probably easier. It's probably more difficult later. If you transfer schools or have any other kind of issue along those lines, it's probably more difficult. As far as the Department of Education, we track internally each career concentration cluster to understand from accountability manner how it is that students are progressing from your introductory level courses to your intermediary courses to your completion courses. So in that series of transitions and areas, what are things that we can pinpoint from the data that would help us make some conclusions about programmatic changes that might need to shift in structure. We know that some pathway concentrations do a better job at this than others. And so what can we learn from those and have those outcomes discussed among our coalition to see what resources are needed in place to do that. The department's strategic plan closely monitors career and college readiness measurements through our Delaware Student Success Framework. So we understand on a various level of 10 metrics how it is that we expect high school students and how we hold schools, LEAs accountable in that measure about 10 different areas that we put together in this career and college readiness area. And our staff, along with the LEA staff, the educators, are seeking ways in which that we might monitor that and make improvements in those particular areas, or think about new ways that might be a better measurement as we're thinking about the workforce of today and tomorrow and how that moves through that area. Luke and Kim mentioned, and I mentioned a few statistics. We know overall the system has some positive outcomes and positive reports. So we know we have the problem. We know we're making some positive frameworks. We're making some positive impacts on the community. The system is ever changing and evolving, and we want it to get better and we want it to improve. And this is one of those particular areas that is focused on that. Programmatic wise, I think things that Kim has been sharing about the middle grades work is just has to be a part of that equation. We have a state requirement for a student success plan. So educators, counselors, parents, teachers can work with students to develop a long-term success plan that they're working towards. And so that exposure that's happening at the middle grades level, those conversations, that kind of emphasis on these areas are all part of that, making that decision at ninth grade about which official pathway I'm going to join. And then even maybe in the earlier stages, how it is I'm going to progress through those particular areas. To complement that, we have a central clearinghouse of communication information and resources on our DelawarePathways.org website. So that is a more public-facing, easier to understand, somewhat interactive data sharing website that the community, parents, students, educators can use to think about the pathways available to them, the options, the availability through school choice. If they find that their option that they're aligning to is not in their LEA that's closest to them, then they can understand a little bit more about the decisions around those particular areas of getting into the right pathway and completing the right pathway and the resources around that. And so that's something the state makes available, and we emphasize that as the one-stop hub for lots of information for others. Other smaller things, but the ability through great advising techniques and great school counseling resources to focus on or have the option to add in additional career-oriented classes if there's space available. There's always kind of this tension between a student's schedule and what it is they can explore from these particular areas. But there are some, if you're in a pathway that is not matching your needs, there might be some additional options to pursue outside of that pathway or in combination of that pathway so that you can make progress towards what it is that is inspiring your passion or moving forward to the next steps of your college career. And then there's other creative things, like some LEAs have access to evening or adult education-based courses where there might be some creative scheduling to add students in to those post-secondary education options or those adult education opportunities throughout the state, throughout our 5 institutions of higher learning, to augment or provide the need for that individual to gain both the confidence, but also the knowledge for their career preparation.
Well, thanks for that. So just a comprehensive, set of opportunities for folks to kind of feel prepared in the pathway that they choose, should they make a choice to change direction and so forth too. In lots of ways that, some acceleration can potentially happen there along the way as well. That's great. So I want to pivot just a little bit to talk about navigation specifically with folks. So it was part of the RTI study and the Delaware study, and a big focus on navigation as part of the work. This is really about how students are making choices, how they're getting support, how they're finding their way. So just spending a few minutes on that. This question is to Rick and Kim. Rodel is really focused on the need for stronger navigational support, better advising, so students can make informed choices, change direction when they need to, as we talked about. But how do you think about who carries what roles in building better navigation support systems, across states, districts, intermediaries, and employers? So I'll turn it both to you to kind of just talk about it from your perspectives.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, we really need to be thinking about the broader system. We know that we cannot put all of this on individual counselors or teachers. We don't want them to reinvent the wheel when we know so many things that already work. And so the state's, the state DOE, their role really is to help build a comprehensive plan. So I know that Rick's going to talk a little bit about that, but I wanted to talk more about what it looks like on the ground and the student success plan that Rick alluded to earlier. And we are actively working right now to make sure that districts are not treating the individual student plan like a static file. You do it in ninth grade, you look at it again in 12th grade, where did we land? No, we really want it to be something that is continuously revised, that students go back to with an adult, whether it's their counselor, teacher, and some other type of mentor or advisor. And so we're actively working right now into embedding advising into regular school hours with a lot of different types of educators, because we know that students connect with adults that we don't always know who they might be. They could be a coach, it could be a secretary, it could be someone, we just don't know. And so we want to make sure that students have access to the adults in their lives, and that those adults are trained in such a way that they would be able to point the student in the right direction and make sure that they are actively editing that plan that they may start in 8th, 7th, whichever grade we start, and letting them really iterate on it and making it feel like their own and something that's not, set in stone, that they can edit and really work towards. And so we want to make sure that the districts have the flexibility to help them through that, and also don't feel this burden of keeping to a certain path or structure that might not match the student's vision after a year or two. And so that's one piece. And then I think when we have folks like the Pathways Impact Fund and other partners that like Gates that can help us to think about bold solutions and really implement them and give them a shot. Like Luke was saying earlier, we have the opportunity to do these pilots and try different ways to see how we can do this differently. We know what we're doing now is not enough. We need to do more. And so this is an opportunity for us to really explore different ways of advising, thinking about college and career, transition coaches, thinking about how we even utilize the data that we have. There's so much we can do. And then I think the other piece is like, we're actively including employers, post-secondary partners, and making sure that they are also informing us, because things change, like I mentioned earlier. And so we can't expect the counselors to be up to date on everything that may have changed since yesterday. And so it's important that we are, keeping those loops going and the conversation open. And I think we are in a really beautiful spot, honestly, where we have these relationships in Delaware. We are a small community, we care about one another. And so folks want to be at the table, folks want to contribute, folks want to, really inform the next steps. And I say that, and I also want to acknowledge that we also always have to keep the student at the center, right? So an employer has their needs, post-secondary has their needs. Our needs need to be focused on the student and what they ultimately will make them a happy, successful person. And so that's kind of what our job is, to make sure that all of those pieces are being checked, and making sure that we have the student's best interests at heart. But the navigation shouldn't belong to any one person. The state is really helping us to think about it in a more systemic way. And then our partnerships help us to navigate them on the ground. And so, yeah, it's definitely something that I think we can do as a partnership. But I know, Rick, you had some more pieces to add.
Well, and what a wonderful response. I think that encompasses so many amazing, objectives that just kind of highlight what it is our coalition cares about. And so these are important topics that we bring together, we discuss as a group, educators, non-educators alike, and how do we think about solutions from that. As a state agency, we are working on authorizing the program of study, so the curriculum. A unique part about Delaware system is on the state approved pathways. All curriculum is approved through the state, through the program of study. So there's some opportunities to, as Kim was saying, create the systemic knowledge base that is consistent across pathways and leads to those main hallmarks that we talked about at the very beginning: a series of sequence courses, work-based learning opportunities, industry recognized credential, early post-secondary education access. Those things are all important parts or important elements to the pathway experience. And we regularly review those to make sure they align, that they're performing There's not any systemic issues of participation or access to those issues across the state. And there's been revisions even during my time. There's been times when we've eliminated programs, or we've, redirected programs or combined programs just to make it responsive both to the current workforce needs, but also the current labor market information, or even feedback from LEAs and students to the advisory council, so that the systemic system is working for those who are participating in it, as well as for the economy of Delaware. The other big project that has been related to that is the identifying credentials of value through the process and placing incentives through the accountability plan for the system to perform in ways in which we want the right outcome to be the right outcome. And so not devaluing certificates that don't lead to a middle or high wage job, a high demand job, but placing more emphasis on the certificates that we know do result in those particular outcomes. So knowing that one certificate is a feeder into another bigger certificate, placing more value for the accountability model for individuals who or for schools and for individuals who pursue that credential of value through that particular aspect. And then finally, creating pipelines or creating advising tools for students with disabilities, so that they have options throughout every pathway, through every program of study, and the educators and advisors and parents and students feel that they belong and can perform in each of those particular pathways.
Yeah, no, thank you both for that, in different perspectives, and you see the synergies across the board there. So for folks that are on the live stream, want to make sure you are adding your questions to the chat. Now is an opportunity. We're going to have a few minutes to respond to your questions. Any kind of details you want, clarifications, ideas that you want to ask folks here about the work that's been mentioned, please throw them in there. So a final question before we turn to that Q&A. Luke, Rodel recently received a $1.5 million grant from the Pathways Impact Fund. One of the 5 of our first grantees nationally to receive this investment. Can you tell us how you're using those funds and what it opens up as far as your work going forward?
Absolutely. So the main theme is navigation support, as was highlighted throughout today's call. We essentially want to make sure that students and their families are equipped with the information that they need to determine what paths they want to both pursue in high school and beyond it. And our work is structured through 4 really specific deliverables. So the first, as Kim mentioned, we want to elevate student voice through the measurement of purpose, belonging, and social capital. And we want that measurement to inform both policy and programmatic implementation practice at the building level. So we're really excited about introducing new measures. We're also really excited about how those measures kind of take shape within the state accountability system, or models of feedback and evaluation that are exist in schools today, such as like the CLNA process in Perkins, or the school counseling plan, or other ways in which we can make student voice much more meaningful in terms of its articulation of value and next step. The second piece, as Kim mentioned, is we're really excited to dig in with the department around the student success plan. For many states, there are like 45, 46 states that actually have an individual learning plan requirement for students as they move from middle school to high school. The issue for almost all of those places is implementation. Like, how do we get implementation right? How do we make sure the student and family and other adults in that student's life are equipped to help guide, to help mentor, and to use that plan as a jumping off point for much deeper relationship development, much more social capital network development. The third piece is we are really keen on this idea of navigation and looking at how we create strategic staffing models that couple and add to school counselors, that add to educators, that build off of best practices, either through like TRIO programs federally, through CBO partnerships like Communities in Schools, or other types of models where we can think differently about staffing, and we can ensure that there is a caring adult in every young person's life who has the knowledge, experience, and network to really, build bridges for young people that are much in non-traditional ways. And then the last piece is we are keenly focused on the immediate transition between high school and post-secondary or workforce participation. The state, as mentioned earlier, has this really neat engagement that's called Launch Month, which is really every fall. So every high school, every senior, right, tens of thousands of volunteers pour into Delaware schools to help young people complete apprenticeship applications, college applications, FAFSA forms, right, you name it. We have this really remarkable infrastructure from which to build upon so that we can really create a series of events, activities, supports throughout the student's senior year to make sure that their transition beyond high school is informed, it is planned, it is a financial fit, and everyone in that student and everyone in their lives has essentially the knowledge they need to help articulate that bridge and make sure that that placement beyond high school is one that leads to economic mobility and purpose in that young person's life. So those are really kind of our four big buckets. And in terms of the resources, we're looking at three big things. So the first is we're leading work with LEAs to get the practice correct. We're doing work across with the department to get the policy and the environment correct. And then we're working with data and research teams to essentially make sure that we have information and feedback loops that inform both policy and practice. And it's not more complicated than that. It's can we get it right on the ground? Can we get it right at the system? And do we have the feedback loops to know that we got it right and continue to improve over time?
Yeah, and the way that is great. And the way that I kind of understand, like I summarize it in my mind is, Rodel and Delaware is kind of using like navigation as an entry point to bring together the other elements of, for us, the purposeful pathways frame, which is work-based learning, accelerated coursework, alignment pieces, credentials, degrees of value, jobs with good earnings, right? Those are all important aspects of this. But kind of like really kind of strengthening the navigation as a piece to kind of tie all this together is in all those dimensions that you mentioned, Luke. I think we're an exciting proposition for the work. So
That's exactly right. I think if we get the navigation right, you know what I mean? We're essentially helping young people determine their enrollment in advanced coursework. We're helping work with employers and young people to match around high quality work-based learning, and we're supporting the transition that we know, right, is needed.
yeah, because a core element of our work is really like how do you kind of integrate those experiences for young people so they're building momentum on each other, they're aligned, they're coherent, they're not disparate acts, right? And this is like a mechanism to bring it all together and be able to measure that hopefully over time as well too. So that's great. So we have a question in the chat, and I'll turn it over to the folks here. Rick, you mentioned the work on credentials of value. We have a question around just adding more detail about that. How are you identifying those? What are you considering in that work?
Yes, thank you. And folks from Rodel is probably involved in it as well. So please add in. This was a multi-year process, I think, which the department led an effort with LEAs and our advisory groups to understand for each state-approved program of study, what are the credentials that lead to employment, lead to those middle and high wage, middle and high demand in careers, and working to identify every pathway will have a series of credentials that you do earn along the way, but what's the one that's going to matter post high school, so that we are incentivizing, and we incentivize it through the accountability plan, but which ones are we incentivizing that we make sure in this program of study you're going to leave with X certificate that really matters in the next stages of that career. It's incentivized through the accountability plan. So in order to earn points or earn credit through the career and college readiness metrics through the Delaware Student Success Framework, you have to have earned industry recognized credentials. So some of those credentials, which are important, but we know they're feeder credentials to bigger credentials, they're not recognized in that model anymore. So let's not to pick on first aid. First aid is very important, but that's maybe one of the first certificates you earn in a healthcare related industry. We don't want that to be your last one. So perhaps in the model, you don't earn credit if a student earns a first aid certificate, but perhaps the larger, more industry recognized credentials in that pathway or program study are included in the accountability model. I'm sure there's more to it, but that's kind of the simple version.
Anybody else want to add anything to that?
The only thing I'd add really quickly is just the Department of Education's relationship with the Department of Labor. Delaware was a state that submitted a combined WIOA plan that included Perkins almost a decade and a half ago. And essentially, the state has done a really good job of aligning its in-demand occupations, its definitions of high skill, high wage, in demand across its education and workforce system. And then the credential map that Rick articulated really flows from a shared definition of like economic value across agencies. So there's a bunch of layers at the systems level to get to a point where you're actually defining value with credentials.
Yeah, and that's super important as you're trying to define like some standards of quality, common definitions, trying to figure out how to incentivize different structures through funding or through accountability, right, as well, and creating alignment across the board. That's why those combined plans are really important as mechanisms to kind of do that work. And a few states that we're kind of supporting are thinking about it similarly. So that's great work. So I know we're out of time, unfortunately, and I don't see any more questions in the chat, but I just want to make sure to kind of thank everybody here for your participation. We're super excited about the work that's taken place. Couldn't be more excited about having you all as part of this inaugural cohort. We're really happy to kind of amplify your work. If you want to learn more about Rodel and the Delaware Pathways, check out the Delaware Pathways story, Small State, Big Vision, which we have linked in the chat. And if you and your team are looking at advanced career pathways work in your community, the Training Hub powered by Strive Together just launched a new resource. It's called Purposeful Pathways from Vision to Action, a learning journey. It gives intermediaries, educators, employers, civic leaders a self-paced way to explore the Commission on Purposeful Pathways report and supporting action guides. So there's a link in there to register. That'll be in the chat as well too. And I just want to again thank everybody on this panel for being part of this conversation. And hopefully you guys